cross my heart and hope to die. Welcome to my dark side.
The battlefield was a chaotic war zone, filled with relentless destruction and the ominous churn of dark clouds overhead. Lightning cracked through the sky in rapid, jagged streaks, casting brief flashes of light on the ground below. The very earth trembled under the weight of unimaginable power, forces far beyond what any mortal could comprehend. In the air, suspended like gods of destruction, stood three titanic figures, Broly, Kamek, and Abaddon. Their energies collided like mighty ocean waves crashing against one another, sending shockwaves that rippled deep into the planet's core and even far into the reaches of space. Below them, the ground cracked wide open, rivers of molten lava gushing out across the land. Entire cities, once mighty and proud, crumbled into dust in the distance, unable to withstand the sheer force of the battle raging above. Broly's emerald aura flared violently around him, surging like a storm as he fully unleashed his legendary Super Saiyan form. His enormous muscles bulged, veins throbbing with raw energy, while his white glowing eyes were locked onto his opponents. He let out a furious, earth-shaking roar that echoed across the devastated planet. His targets, Kamek, the vengeful angel bent on maintaining his divine order, and Abaddon, the ancient demon god whose lust for destruction mirrored Broly's own rage, seemed just as determined to end this battle in their favor. Despite Broly's overwhelming strength, his battle instincts screamed at him, a silent, primal warning. He wasn't the strongest in this fight. Hovering above, Kamek appeared like a dark angel of retribution, his glowing halo casting an eerie light around him. His once calm and serene face was twisted with a deep-seated fury, and his entire body was enveloped in divine energy. The death of his comrade, Campari, at the hands of Abaddon had ignited a fierce determination within him, and he was ready to deliver justice. But even as he gathered his power, he couldn't ignore the dangerous presence of Broly. The legendary Saiyan's raw power was a force of nature in itself, untamed and unpredictable. Abaddon floated with a sinister, almost bored indifference, his glowing crimson eyes glinting with sadistic amusement. Dark energy crackled around his blackened armor, and the flashes of lightning revealed his sharp, gleaming teeth as he smiled wickedly. Though he delighted in the chaos, the thrill of clashing with both mortal and angel alike, a small twinge of caution nagged at him. Broly's power, though not godly in the way of deities, was something else entirely. Abaddon had never encountered such raw might in a mortal before, and the thought of it sent a twisted ripple of excitement through him. He couldn't help but grin wider, eager to test the limits of this Saiyan's strength. And then, without warning, all hell broke loose. Broly launched himself forward with the speed of a missile, his enormous frame cutting through the air as his fists blazed with green energy. He closed in on Abaddon with terrifying speed, swinging his fists with enough force to shatter mountains. But Abaddon was unfazed. The demon god raised a single hand and effortlessly deflected the blow, as though swatting away a fly. The grin on Abaddon's face only widened as he retaliated with a devastating counterattack, a blast of dark energy aimed straight for Broly's chest. Broly, however, was no stranger to combat. With a swift twist of his body, he narrowly dodged the attack, the dark energy missing him by inches. In a blur of motion, Broly swung a powerful kick towards Abaddon's side. This time, the blow connected. The impact sent Abaddon hurtling through the sky like a speeding bullet, crashing into the ground below with enough force to send tremors through the land. Despite the damage, Abaddon merely chuckled, barely fazed by the attack. Impressive! Abaddon's voice boomed across the battlefield, filled with twisted delight. But you'll have to do better than that if you want to make me bleed, little Sen. Just then, Kamek seized the opportunity to strike. With the precision and grace of an angel, he darted through the air, his hands moving faster than lightning. Divine energy crackled around his fists as he unleashed a rapid barrage of blows at Broly. Broly barely had time to react, raising his arms just in time to block the strikes. But each hit from Kamek sent powerful shockwaves through Broly's body, forcing him to grit his teeth against the pain. The angel's power was far more refined than Broly's raw, untamed strength. With a defiant roar, Broly thrust his hands forward, unleashing a massive wave of emerald energy that forced Kamek to retreat. The angel spun through the air, quickly catching himself and regaining his balance. But as he prepared for another strike, he felt a dark presence behind him. It was Abaddon. The demon god had reappeared, his twisted grin still plastered on his face. A dark blade of energy formed in his hand, crackling with malevolent power. Without a word, Abaddon slashed at Kamek, aiming to cut him in half with a single, deadly stroke. Kamek barely dodged the lethal strike, the dark blade whistling past him, cutting through the air just inches from his body. He quickly retaliated, summoning a brilliant flash of light as a divine barrier enveloped him, his form glowing with celestial energy. His eyes, now blazing with righteous fury, bore into his opponents with a fierce intensity. "You demon filth," Konik spat, his voice cold and unwavering, as if every word dripped with disgust. "Your very existence is an insult to all that is sacred. I will end you here and now." Abaddon only chuckled, the sound low and menacing, as dark energy swirled around him like a living storm. His crimson eyes gleamed with amusement, his smile twisted with malice. "Angels and their self-righteous speeches," he mocked, his tone dripping with scorn. "But tell me, Konik, how many of your oh-so-divine siblings have fallen to mortals like this one?" He gestured to Broly, who was already rising again, his emerald aura flaring back to life, burning hotter and more ferocious with each second. Konik's expression darkened at the mention of fallen angels, his fists tightening as he suppressed the rage building within. "Do not compare this sand to the likes of you," Konik shot back, his voice filled with disdain. "His power, though wild, comes from a will to protect. You demons," he practically spat the word, "only seek to destroy." For the first time, Abaddon's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing as a cold gleam flickered in their depth. "You angels," he hissed, his tone growing more sinister, "are blind to the truth. Destruction is not just inevitable, it is necessary, and I am its purest form." Before Konik could respond, a sudden roar split the sky like thunder. Broly, eyes wild and burning with unrelenting fury, charged forward again, his legendary Super Saiyan form surging with power. His fist, alight with emerald energy, streaked toward Konik with unstoppable force. The impact of the punch was deafening, the sheer force sending shockwaves through the air. Konik blocked it just in time, their fists colliding in an explosion of power that rippled across the already ruined battlefield. The ground beneath them shook violently as energy burst forth from their clash, spreading destruction in every direction. Konik gritted his teeth as he struggled against Broly's raw strength. The Saiyan's power was monstrous, untamed and overwhelming. Each of Broly's blows felt like a sledgehammer, pounding with incredible force. Broly's muscles bulged and strained as he pressed harder, his aura growing even more intense. His eyes glowed with an almost primal determination, his teeth gritted in fury. For a brief moment, he seemed to gain the upper hand, forcing Konik back. But even as Broly pushed forward with everything he had, his body was beginning to feel the strain of the battle. His energy, though vast, was not limitless, and with each strike, he was burning through his reserves. Every movement felt just a little slower, each punch a little heavier. Still, Broly fought on, unaware that despite his incredible power, he was still not on the same level as these godlike beings. His attacks became less precise, more wild and uncontrolled. Abaddon and Konik exchanged a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Despite their fierce rivalry, they could both sense it. Broly's power was starting to wane. Though the Saiyan was immensely powerful, he was still not a true match for either of them. Not yet. But Broly didn't know that. His heart burned with a single, driving desire: to fight, to overpower, to win. As the battle raged on, the very fabric of the earth itself began to tear apart. Inside the protective dome, Bulma fought desperately to stabilize the planet's core. Her fingers flew over the console, typing in command after command, but nothing was working. The ground beneath her feet trembled violently, cracks spreading across the floor like spiderwebs. "We're running out of time," Bulma shouted, her voice tight with panic as sweat dripped down her forehead. She furiously continued typing, her mind racing for a solution. Nearby, Chile's face grew pale with fear as she watched the chaos unfold. "Bulma, what do we do? If we don't stabilize the core..." Bulma cut her off, her voice grim. "The planet will explode." She swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. "I know." Trunks and Goten stood guard at the entrance, their faces tense as they felt the violent tremors shaking the earth. Their expressions were grim, their eyes flickering between the battle raging outside and the crumbling ground beneath them. Earth itself was falling apart, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Then, a blaring alarm echoed through the dome, the sharp sound signaling what they had all feared. Earth's core was beyond saving. The planet had passed the point of no return, and now it was only a matter of time before everything was torn apart. Bulma's heart sank as she realized the inevitable. "We have to evacuate," she said, her voice heavy with resignation. "There's no saving Earth now." Without wasting another second, Bulma grabbed her daughter, Bulla, and bolted toward the ship docked in the lab. Trunks quickly followed, staying close to his mother and sister, his eyes scanning for any threats. Chi-Lai, Chi-Chi, and the others weren't far behind, each of them moving quickly and urgently as the ground beneath them continued to crack and break apart. Chi-Chi held Goten close, while Krillin rushed his daughter Marin towards safety. Videl and Pan sprinted after them, worry etched across their faces. As they boarded the ship, Bulma paused for a brief moment, her eyes lingering on the dome she had built with her own hands. She had poured years of her life into it, designing it to protect those she loved. Now, it was all about to be destroyed, reduced to rubble along with the rest of the planet. But there was no time for sentimentality. Earth was doomed, and their only hope lay in escape. The ship's engines roared to life, their powerful thrusters igniting with a loud hum as it shot off the ground. Within moments, the ship broke through the atmosphere, rocketing away from the crumbling planet below. Earth was tearing itself apart, cracks splitting across its surface like shattered glass. Chunks of land floated up, swirling in the chaos of the impending planetary collapse. But on the battlefield, Broly, Konik, and Abaddon were oblivious to the destruction, locked in a relentless, brutal battle. The air was thick with energy, crackling and sparking as the three titans clashed again and again, their attacks shaking the very heavens. Broly fought like a beast unleashed, his body driven by sheer rage and instinct. His emerald aura flared around him like a wildfire, and his blows landed with earth-shattering force. Yet the more he fought, the more he felt it, a creeping realization that was beginning to eat away at him. Despite his fury, despite the raw power coursing through his veins, it wasn't enough. He wasn't strong enough, not yet. With a final desperate roar that echoed across the battlefield, Broly pushed himself to his absolute limit, unleashing the full power of his legendary Super Saiyan form. His aura erupted in a dazzling explosion of light, burning brighter than it ever had before. His muscles bulged even further, veins throbbing with the immense energy rushing through his body. The ground beneath him cracked under the pressure of his transformation. But despite all this power, something was still missing. Abaddon sneered, watching Broly struggle with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Pathetic," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You may have power, Sen, but you are nothing compared to a demon god." Broly's entire body trembled with the strain of his transformation, yet his spirit remained unbroken. His aura blazed even brighter, his muscles swelling with a last surge of energy. Every fiber of his being screamed in defiance, but Broly refused to give in. Deep within him, something stirred, something primal and ancient that was fighting its way to the surface. Abaddon, sensing Broly's internal struggle, grinned wickedly. He knew this battle was coming to an end. With a flicker of dark energy, he closed the distance between them in an instant. His twisted blade of dark energy aimed directly at Broly's heart. This would be the final blow. But just as the blade was about to strike, Broly let out a deafening roar, a roar so powerful it shook the very foundations of the battlefield. His aura exploded outward once again, but this time, it wasn't the familiar emerald hue of his legendary Super Saiyan form. Instead, it was a wild mix of gold and red, swirling around him like flames. Fiery energy crackled through the air, surrounding Broly in an almost untouchable aura. His hair lengthened, shifting to a deep crimson, and his once pale skin darkened, taking on a more primal, animalistic appearance. His eyes glowed with an intense, otherworldly light. In this moment, Broly had undergone yet another transformation, into the fearsome legendary Super Saiyan 4. Abaddon, who had been so confident just moments before, stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at Broly's new form. The raw power radiating off Broly was nothing like he had ever felt before. It wasn't godly in the traditional sense, but it was something far more terrifying, something wild and uncontrollable. Abaddon's stomach twisted with a sickening realization. Broly's power, now devoid of any divine ki, was completely immune to Abaddon's ability to siphon energy. This is impossible," Abaddon hissed, his voice filled with anger and frustration. "A mortal cannot achieve such power without divine ki. How can you have this kind of strength?" Broly's glowing eyes snapped to Abaddon, his lips curling into a feral snarl. There was something different about him now, something more controlled but just as fierce. Deep inside, Yamoshi's teachings echoed in Broly's mind. Lessons about harnessing his rage, using it as a tool rather than letting it consume him. Broly was no longer a mindless berserker. He had become something far more dangerous, a warrior with purpose, with focus. "You talk too much," Broly growled, his voice deep and guttural, almost animalistic. Without wasting another second, he lunged at Abaddon with blinding speed, his movement creating a shockwave that shattered the sky around them. Abaddon barely had time to react. Broly's fist crashed into his chest like a meteor, the impact so devastating that it sent the demon god flying backward, hurtling through the air. Abaddon slammed into the ground with an earth-shaking thud, the force of his landing creating a massive crater that swallowed mountains and valleys alike. Konik, who had been watching from a distance, floated in stunned silence. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Broly's transformation defied everything Konik knew about power in the universe. It wasn't just the raw strength that terrified him, it was the fact that Broly had tapped into something that didn't follow the established rules of divine and mortal power. This was something new, something that challenged the very balance of the universe itself. Konik hovered in mid-air, his eyes wide with shock as he watched Broly's power explode in a way that defied everything he thought he knew about mortals. How did a mortal reach this level? He muttered, his mind racing to make sense of it all. He had always viewed mortals as beneath the gods and angels, but these Saiyans, Broly, Goku, Vegeta, were different. They evolved and adapted in ways that broke the natural order, becoming stronger with each battle. Konik was beginning to realize that he could no longer afford to hold back, not against Broly. Broly landed on the ground with a deafening crash, the earth cracking beneath his feet as dust and debris flew into the air. His glowing crimson eyes were locked onto the massive crater where Abaddon had fallen. Broly's chest heaved with every breath, his animalistic form radiating raw, untamed power. He was ready to charge, to finish the demon god off once and for all. But before Broly could move, Konik descended from the sky, his divine aura flaring like a burning sun. The angel's expression was stern, his eyes narrowed with determination. With a flick of his wrist, Konik summoned a massive spear of pure energy, glowing with radiant light. He didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he hurled the spear directly at Broly. The attack was lightning fast, too quick for even Broly to avoid. It struck him square in the chest, sending him skidding backward, his feet tearing trenches into the ground as he struggled to maintain his balance. Yet, despite the force of the impact, Broly barely flinched. He grunted, the pain hardly registering in his new form. His muscles tightened, his aura blazing brighter. With a growl, Broly raised his hand, and a swirling orb of green and red energy formed in his palm, glowing like a small sun. Konik's eyes hardened as he prepared for Broly's retaliation. Without a moment's pause, the angel shot forward, his body enveloped in divine light as he charged to meet Broly head-on. The battlefield shook with their clash. Broly's brute strength met Konik's precise, divine power. Each blow they exchanged sent shockwaves tearing through the air, the sheer force of their strikes ripping apart the already shattered land beneath them. Broly fought with a wild fury, his fists crashing down like hammers, each one capable of leveling mountains. But Konik countered with grace and speed, his movements fluid and deadly, slicing through the air like a blade of light. At one point, Broly let out a ferocious roar, his rage fueling him further. He unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, each one exploding with a power that could have obliterated entire cities. Konik darted through the attacks with astonishing speed, weaving between the blasts like a phantom, each explosion barely grazing him. Then, in an instant, Konik appeared in front of Broly, delivering a powerful kick to his side. The impact sent Broly crashing into a nearby mountain, the stone crumbling around him. But Broly wasn't down for long. The massive sand burst through the debris, his aura surging even higher as he charged back into the fight. His power was growing by the second, each moment only fueling his transformation further. Konik, still in disbelief, began to understand something terrifying. Broly wasn't weakening, he was getting stronger. "I have to end this now," Konik whispered to himself, his voice filled with grim resolve. His hands glowed with intense divine energy as he prepared to use his most powerful technique, a move capable of erasing Broly from existence entirely. But before Konik could act, the ground beneath them erupted in a violent explosion. Abaddon shot out of the crater like a meteor, his dark energy swirling around him in a furious storm. His crimson eyes blazed with unholy rage as he glared at Broly, his pride deeply wounded by the Sen's earlier attack. "You dare strike me, mortal!" Abaddon's voice thundered across the battlefield, shaking the very sky. His twisted face was contorted with fury, his demonic energy crackling like a storm around him. "You will regret this insolence." With a roar of fury, Abaddon unleashed a massive wave of dark energy. It surged across the battlefield like a tsunami, tearing through the ground and sending chunks of earth flying in every direction. The wave raced toward both Broly and Konik with terrifying speed, intent on obliterating everything in its path. Konik, acting quickly, summoned a divine barrier around himself, the golden light of his protection holding firm against the dark wave. Broly, on the other hand, didn't flinch. His glowing aura flared around him as he stood his ground, bracing for the impact. The wave crashed into Broly with the force of a freight train, the dark energy swirling violently around him. For a moment, it seemed like Broly would be swallowed whole by the destructive power. But then, With a deafening roar, Broly's aura exploded outward, shattering the wave of dark energy into pieces. The remnants of the attack scattered into the sky like shards of glass, vanishing into the air. Broly stood tall, his body glowing with the immense power of his legendary Super Saiyan 4 form. The force of his defiance sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield, causing the already fractured earth to split open even further. But the battle was far from over. Abaddon and Konik launched themselves at Broly in unison, their auras blazing like twin infernos of divine and demonic power. They moved with blinding speed, determined to crush Broly from both sides. Broly, in his legendary Super Saiyan 4 form, let out a thunderous roar in response, his own fiery aura surging outward to meet their combined might. The sky above them seemed to tremble as their auras clashed violently, lighting up the heavens like fireworks made of pure destruction. The three titans collided once again, and the shockwave from their impact sent ripples of energy tearing through the planet and into the very atmosphere. Each punch and blast felt like a meteor crashing down, shaking the ground and sending chunks of earth flying into the sky. Explosions erupted everywhere, lighting up the world as if stars were being born and dying in a single instant. Entire continents crumbled beneath the weight of their power. The oceans boiled away into nothingness, and the once lush landscapes were reduced to wastelands. The sheer magnitude of their battle consumed everything in its path, leaving nothing untouched. High above the chaos, inside Bulma's ship, the Z fighters and their families watched in stunned silence. Their hearts were heavy with the realization that Earth was on the brink of destruction. They had managed to escape just in time, but the planet they had called home for so long was teetering on the edge of annihilation. Even though they believed in Goku, Vegeta, Broly, and the others, the uncertainty gnawed at them, leaving them feeling helpless. Trunks stood near the ship's observation window, staring down at the crumbling earth below. His face was grim, but his voice carried a quiet determination as he spoke. "We'll come back. We have to believe they'll find a way to fix this." His words hung in the air, filled with the hope that everything wasn't lost, that their world could still be saved. Yet, as the seconds ticked away, the countdown to Earth's destruction inched closer and closer to zero. There was no denying the gravity of the situation. The planet had less than 20 minutes before it would explode, and the brutal fight between Broly, Konik, and Abaddon showed no signs of slowing down. Each moment felt like a race against time, and the Z fighters could do nothing but wait, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Broly's power continued to surge. His body glowed with an intense, blinding light, his aura growing fiercer with each passing second. It was as if he was tapping into a limitless well of strength, a power that kept rising and rising, pushing him beyond his previous limits. Every punch he threw, every blast of energy he unleashed, felt stronger than the last. Broly could feel the tides of the battle beginning to turn. The once overwhelming forces of Konik and Abaddon were no longer as insurmountable as they had been. He could sense the shift. He was gaining the upper hand. The ground beneath them cracked and splintered as Broly, Konik, and Abaddon clashed again, sending shockwaves rippling out in all directions. The sheer force of their battle reached far beyond the planet, their energy echoing into the depths of space. But the clock was still ticking, and with each minute that passed, Earth drew closer to its final moment. The Z fighters, now far from the battlefield, watched in tense anticipation, their hearts filled with both hope and fear. They waited, praying that the outcome would bring salvation rather than ruin. Back on planet Yardrat, far from the chaos on Earth, Vegeta had collapsed outside his healing pod. His premature awakening had left him weakened, his body still not fully recovered from his injuries. Despite this, he stood tall, his breathing labored but his spirit unbroken. His fiery determination burned in his eyes, refusing to let weakness keep him down. The Yardratians surrounding him were left in shock, their eyes wide as they witnessed the sane prince defying the natural recovery process. The elder Yardrat approached him slowly, concern etched across his usually calm face. "Vegeta, you shouldn't be out of the pod," he said gently, his voice filled with worry. "Your body isn't ready yet, you need more time to heal." Vegeta, still panting heavily, glared at the elder with fierce determination. "I don't have the luxury of resting any longer," he growled through gritted teeth, his voice thick with urgency. "The Earth, Broly, Kakarot, and the others, they need me. I can feel it." His fists clenched tightly, trembling with the effort of standing despite his weakened state. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to rest, but Vegeta's pride and willpower refused to let him stay down. Vegeta's legs trembled beneath him, his muscles still aching and not yet fully restored, but he willed himself to stand tall. The pull of the battle raging on Earth was too strong to ignore. He could feel it. Broly's wild energy tearing through the planet, the overwhelming presence of powerful foes, and Earth itself weakening with every passing moment. It felt like the universe was on the verge of collapsing under the weight of these titanic clashes. Though Vegeta knew he wasn't at his full strength, his burning pride and the urge to protect his family were driving him forward. The elder Yardrat stepped closer, trying once more to dissuade him. Vegeta, if you push yourself like this, you could, but Vegeta cut him off, his voice sharp and unyielding. I don't have time for warnings, I need senzu beans. They're the only thing that can restore me in time. The elder Yardrat sighed deeply, seeing the fierce determination etched into Vegeta's face. There would be no reasoning with him. Then you'll need to act quickly. Your friends on Earth are counting on you, and now, the entire universe may be counting on you. Vegeta closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He reached out with his senses, focusing on the distant energy signature of Korin's tower back on Earth. Summoning every ounce of strength left within his battered body, he gritted his teeth and, with a burst of energy, vanished from planet Yardrat in a flash of blue light, leaving the Yardratians staring after him in stunned silence. Vegeta reappeared at Korin's tower, materializing in a blur of light. He staggered briefly as he landed, his legs threatening to buckle beneath him from the strain of the long-distance teleportation. Korin, the wise and relaxed cat-like guardian of the tower, was lounging nearby with Yajirobe, both of them lost in their usual laid-back routine. The sudden appearance of the sane prince caught them off guard. Vegeta! Korin exclaimed, his wide eyes betraying his surprise. You look like you just crawled out of a war zone. What happened to you? Yajirobe, who had been lazily munching on some snacks, nearly choked when he saw Vegeta's beaten and exhausted form. Whoa, Vegeta, you look like you've been hit by a truck, he blurted out, still holding a half-eaten piece of food in his hand. Vegeta's patience was already razor thin, and Yajirobe's comment didn't help. He shot them both a fierce glare, his voice dripping with frustration. I don't have time for idle chatter, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. I need a senzu bean, right now. Korin exchanged an awkward look with Yajirobe before scratching the back of his head sheepishly. Yeah, about that. Korin began hesitantly, his usual calm demeanor faltering. There's only one left. Vegeta's scowl deepened, his anger simmering just below the surface. What do you mean, only one left? How could you let that happen? Yajirobe, now sweating nervously, shifted uncomfortably under Vegeta's piercing gaze. Well, you see, he started, his voice shaky. I might have eaten the rest of them. I mean, those senzu beans are pretty great, right? I couldn't help it. They're like magic snacks. Vegeta's eyes narrowed dangerously, and for a brief moment, Yajirobe was convinced he was about to be vaporized on the spot. But instead, Vegeta extended his hand, his voice dark and menacing. Give me the last one, he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Without another word, Korin tossed the final senzu bean to Vegeta. The sane prince caught it effortlessly, his movements still sharp despite his weakened state. Without hesitation, he popped the bean into his mouth, chewing quickly. Almost instantly, a surge of raw energy coursed through his body, like an electric shock rejuvenating every fiber of his being. His muscles tightened, his wounds closed, and his strength returned in full force. He clenched his fist, feeling the familiar power surge back into him as if he had never been weakened at all. The boost from the senzu bean was nothing short of miraculous. Every muscle in Vegeta's body tightened with new strength, his wounds healing instantly as though they'd never been there. His energy skyrocketed, surging higher than he could have imagined. The effects of the senzu bean combined with the powerful Zenkai boost, which had been building in his sane blood from his recent near-death experiences, brought him to new levels of power. The blue aura around him flared with crackling intensity, filling the air with a thunderous hum. Vegeta clenched his fist, feeling the raw energy coursing through him like a wild storm. His muscles pulsed with power, stronger than ever before. He could feel it. His strength had not only returned but had reached an entirely new peak. The Zenkai boost had pushed his power beyond its previous limits, and Vegeta reveled in it. Then, something extraordinary happened. The spike in Vegeta's energy was so immense that it rippled across the universe like a shockwave. Back on the crumbling battlefield, Broly, Konik, and Abaddon were locked in their ferocious struggle, exchanging blows that shook the planet. Yet, in the midst of it, all three warriors froze as they felt the massive surge in power. Each of them turned their heads instinctively toward the source, eyes wide with recognition. Konik's eyes widened with disbelief. He could feel the energy as clearly as if it were right beside him. This power, it's not from a mortal, Konik muttered, his voice laced with shock. But it's not divine either, could it be? But how did he escape from Father? The confusion in his voice was evident, as he tried to piece together how such a power had emerged. Abaddon, his sinister grin fading, clenched his fists in frustration, the dark energy around him swirling more violently. Another mortal with power like this, he snarled, his voice filled with fury. What is it with this planet? God-level threats just keep popping up from nowhere. First Broly, and now this. The demon god's confidence wavered for the first time as he realized the magnitude of Vegeta's return. For Broly, however, the reaction was completely different. The moment he sensed the energy, his face broke into a broad, excited grin. His wild white eyes flickered with joy, and he let out a deep, satisfied laugh that echoed across the battlefield. It was a moment of clarity for him, a sign that things were about to shift in their favor. Vegeta, Broly muttered, his voice full of exhilaration and relief. He raised his head, gazing toward the sky as he felt the familiar energy pulsing through the atmosphere like a beacon of hope. His heart surged with confidence, and his own power responded in kind, blazing even brighter. Broly's grin widened further, his excitement unmistakable. Vegeta's back, he said with a low, determined growl. For the first time in what had felt like an endless barrage of battle, Broly felt a calm certainty wash over him. He knew what was coming next. Their reunion would change the course of this fight. With a newfound sense of strength, Broly steadied himself and prepared for what was to come. The gang's finally coming back together, he said, a spark of rage igniting in his eyes.
From the towering heights of Korin's lookout, Vegeta, now enveloped in the radiant aura of his blue transformation, gazed intently at the planet below. The atmosphere around him crackled with power, yet a deep unease gnawed at his heart. The planet was only minutes away from obliteration, its fate sealed. His brow furrowed, and a rare twinge of guilt pierced through his normally unshakable resolve. My family, I should have never left for so long, he murmured to himself, the regret heavy in his voice. Desperation surged through him as he placed 2 fingers on his forehead, attempting to locate Bulma's energy signature. But to his shock, he couldn't sense her on Earth. His heart pounded faster as he concentrated harder, tracing her energy across the vastness of space. It was then he realized she was far from Earth, and worse yet, she wasn't alone. The other Z fighters were with her, their energy flickering weakly, almost extinguished. In an instant, Vegeta vanished, reappearing on a spaceship drifting through the cold expanse of space. The transition was seamless, his body materializing directly in front of Piccolo. The Namekian was the first to react, his eyes widening in disbelief. Vegeta, you're here? Piccolo muttered, his voice thick with astonishment. He had sensed the arrival of Broly and had braced himself for the worst, but Vegeta appearing so suddenly was beyond what he had expected. His senses were on high alert, every muscle tensed, ready for anything. He scanned the area quickly, searching for the others. Where are Kakarot and Gohan? Aren't they with you? Or are they still on Earth, fighting Broly? Piccolo demanded, his voice edged with urgency. But then he noticed the change in Vegeta's expression. The proud Saiyan warrior's face had fallen, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something darker, something akin to shame. Vegeta's fists clenched tightly as he muttered under his breath, Kakarot, you always had to be the hero, didn't you? You idiot. His voice wavered, a mix of anger and sorrow, the conflict within him palpable. He replayed the recent events in his mind. Goku's sacrifice to save him, the portal closing behind Vegeta while Kakarot stayed behind. Goku could have escaped, but he chose to throw Vegeta to safety instead. Kakarot, if you're still alive, you'd better stay that way, Vegeta growled, his voice barely above a whisper. The Dragon Balls are gone. There's no coming back this time. If you don't want your family to suffer, you'll find a way to survive. After I deal with the mess on Earth, I'll come back for you, and then I'll repay the debt I owe you. Piccolo watched Vegeta carefully, his sharp eyes noticing every nuance of the Saiyan's expression. There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken truth that Piccolo dreaded to hear. What happened to them, Vegeta? Piccolo's voice trembled slightly, his tough exterior cracking. What happened to Gohan? The fear in his voice was unmistakable, a father's fear for his child. Vegeta's face hardened as he met Piccolo's gaze. Gohan is dead. The words were like daggers, sharp and final. Vegeta's mind flashed back to the battle, the moment he saw Gohan fall. The pain in his eyes mirrored Piccolo's, a shared grief between warriors. Piccolo staggered back, his emotions a whirlwind of shock, anger, and despair. He knew the Dragon Balls were inactive, their power spent on a wish to empower him. The weight of the loss was almost unbearable, but Vegeta wasn't done. And Goku, he's been captured. He might already be dead, considering who we were up against," Vegeta continued, his voice grim. "Even at full strength, we didn't stand a chance. In fact, that brat looked like he was toying with us." Vegeta's fists tightened until his knuckles turned white. Then, with a low, dangerous tone, he added, "But if I know Kakarot, he won't die just yet. Not until I've had the chance to kill him myself." In another part of the ship, Chi-Chi was returning from the bathroom when she overheard Vegeta's words. The world seemed to stop as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Her son, her beloved Gohan, was dead. The pain was instant and overwhelming, a mother's worst nightmare coming to life. Her knees buckled and she collapsed to the floor, her mind unable to process the grief. "No, no, my Gohan," she whimpered, her voice breaking. Then the dam of her emotions burst and she screamed, a heart-wrenching cry of pure agony. Her firstborn son was gone, and her husband could be dead too. Chi-Chi's world crumbled around her as she sobbed uncontrollably, her heart shattered into pieces. The piercing scream from Chi-Chi sent shockwaves through the ship, drawing everyone's attention. Without a second thought, Goten sprinted toward the source of the cry, his heart pounding with fear. Right behind him was Bulma, her face etched with worry. They burst into the room, finding Chi-Chi on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom!" Goten cried out, rushing to his mother's side. His voice was filled with concern and confusion. "What's wrong? What happened?" Bulma, who had been right behind him, skidded to a halt as her eyes fell on Vegeta. Her breath caught in her throat. The sight of him standing there was almost too much to believe. After all the chaos, she had prayed for his return, and now he was here. But the look on his face, the grim, sorrowful expression, told her that the news he brought was not good. Anger bubbled up inside her, but it was tempered by the sight of Chi-Chi's anguish. Bulma's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to lash out, to scream at Vegeta for not coming sooner, for leaving them all in this mess. She wanted to slap him for not being there when she and Bulla needed him most, when they were scared and defenseless. But as she looked at Chi-Chi's tear-streaked face, her rage melted into empathy. Chi-Chi was in a world of pain, and no amount of anger could fix that. Chi-Chi's cries continued, a raw, heart-wrenching sound that filled the room with grief. Her body shook with sobs, her hands clutching her chest as if trying to hold her heart together. Then, through the tears, she choked out the words that shattered everyone's hope. My Gohan is dead." Her voice cracked, each word a dagger to the heart. She looked up at Vegeta, desperation and disbelief in her eyes. "Goku! How could you let them kill my son? How could you let them kill you?" The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating the room in sorrow. Bulma turned her gaze to Vegeta, searching his face for any sign that this was some kind of terrible mistake. But the pained expression he wore told her everything she needed to know. It was true. They were gone. Gohan, Goku, both lost to them forever. Krillin, standing off to the side, felt his world crumble. Out of all the Z fighters, the loss hit him the hardest. His eyes were wide with shock, his breath shallow as the reality set in. The Dragon Balls on Earth were gone, used up in a desperate wish. That meant those who had fallen were gone for good. Tien, Yamcha, Gohan, Goku. Krillin's voice was barely a whisper at first, but it quickly rose to a shout, his grief overwhelming him. "We can't bring them back!" But as the weight of the loss bore down on everyone, Piccolo's eyes suddenly widened in realization. How could he have forgotten? The answer had been there all along, but the chaos had clouded his mind. He slammed his hands against the wall of the ship, frustration mingling with a newfound hope. "Wait, there is a way!" Piccolo's voice cut through the despair, making everyone turn to him. "The Dragon Balls, we can still use the ones on my home planet. Planet Namek. Porunga can grant up to 3 wishes." Everyone's eyes lit up with a renewed sense of hope. Even Chi-Chi, who moments before had been drowning in grief, looked up with a flicker of light in her tear-filled eyes. The possibility of bringing everyone back was within reach. Krillin nearly jumped out of his skin with excitement. "We can bring them all back! We could even wish for this whole war to be over." He was almost giddy with the thought, his mind racing with the possibilities. But before he could finish, Vegeta's voice roared over him, cutting through the excitement like a blade. "No!" Vegeta's face twisted in anger as he stared down Krillin. "How dare you suggest such a thing? I am a Saiyan, damn it. The prince of all Saiyans. How could you even think I would take such a coward's way out? Don't you have any pride as a warrior? I will not win like that. I will win with my own power. The fury in Vegeta's voice was undeniable. It was the pride of a warrior who refused to accept anything less than victory on his own terms. Without another word, he turned away from them, his body trembling with rage. And in the blink of an eye, Vegeta was gone, teleporting back to Earth, where Broly awaited. The rest of the group was left standing in silence, the hope that had just begun to grow now flickering uncertainly in the shadows of Vegeta's departure. "Long time no see," Vegeta said, his voice low and filled with simmering rage. He didn't take his eyes off Abaddon, his focus like a razor's edge. The air around him crackled with tension as his energy flared, causing the ground beneath him to tremble. The sheer force of his power made the atmosphere heavy, and it was clear that Vegeta was on the brink of unleashing something devastating. Broly, standing a short distance away, couldn't tear his gaze from the scene unfolding before him. The sight of Abaddon ignited something primal within him, a seething anger that was barely contained. "That one's mine," Broly growled, his voice thick with vengeance. His eyes narrowed as they locked onto Abaddon. "He's the one who was part of the group that killed Gohan. I want him for myself. I'll make him suffer the same fate Gohan did." The pain of losing Gohan still burned fresh in his heart, and Broly's desire for revenge was undeniable. Turning his attention to the other presence on the battlefield, Broly nodded toward the distant figure. "The angel is all yours," he said to Vegeta, his tone resolute. Broly then shifted his focus entirely to Abaddon, preparing himself for the fight ahead. This time, there would be no holding back. He was ready to unleash his full power, free from the constraints of conserving energy. Before, he had been forced to fight cautiously, facing two powerful foes simultaneously, unsure of the full extent of their strength. But now, with Vegeta at his side, he could go all out. Vegeta's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "The angel, huh?" he muttered to himself. His mind raced as he tried to recall the angel's name, but it eluded him. "No matter," he said, dismissing the thought. This could be tricky. Vegeta's entire demeanor shifted as he prepared for battle, his face becoming a mask of seriousness. He knew what was coming, and he was ready for it. And then it happened. A transformation that had long been anticipated, long feared by those who knew of its potential, began to take shape. Vegeta's body surged with power as he ascended into a form beyond what anyone had seen before. Ultra Ego 3. But this was no ordinary transformation. It was a form honed through centuries of battle, through trials that had pushed Vegeta to the very brink of death. He had faced angels, demons, gods of destruction, and even Zeno himself, emerging stronger each time. The boost in power he had received from these near-death experiences was astronomical, elevating him to a level that defied comprehension. As Vegeta stood there, radiating this newfound power, Abaddon's eyes widened in shock. He could hardly believe what he was witnessing. It wasn't just the raw power that stunned him. It was Vegeta's aura, an aura that resonated with the essence of a true demon god. It was unlike anything Abaddon had encountered in a mortal. To him, Vegeta was no mere warrior. He was a primordial demon god, a being of pure destruction. The aura around Vegeta wasn't just similar to that of a demon. It was identical, carrying the unmistakable signature of one who had perfected the art of destruction, far beyond what any god of destruction could achieve. "How can this be?" Abaddon's voice trembled with disbelief as he took a step back, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. What has happened in the time we were locked away? Has that child Zeno been experimenting with the demon race again? The questions swirled in his mind, each more troubling than the last. Vegeta, a mortal, was now on par with some of the strongest beings in the demon race. The very idea was unthinkable. Abaddon's confusion quickly turned to suspicion. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. How had a mortal like Vegeta achieved such power? How had he come to possess the aura of a true demon god? And more importantly, how could Abaddon reclaim that power for himself? No matter how much Vegeta's aura felt like that of a demon, Abaddon knew one undeniable truth. Vegeta was still immortal, and that made him vulnerable. As Vegeta stood there, his eyes locked on Abaddon, the battlefield seemed to shrink around them. The air was thick with tension, and it was clear that a clash of unimaginable proportions was about to unfold. Abaddon, standing tall and mighty, turned his attention fully toward Vegeta. His eyes burned with the desire for battle, and his aura flared like a raging inferno, causing the earth beneath them to tremble violently. The ground cracked and split, and the impending destruction of the planet seemed to accelerate as Abaddon's power surged. For Abaddon, the Earth's imminent destruction was little more than an inconvenience. He knew that it wouldn't harm him in the slightest. His race possessed regenerative capabilities that far surpassed even those of Cell and Kid Buu. As for Konik, his nature was different, almost enigmatic. Konik wasn't a real being in the traditional sense. He was the manifestation of something far more complex, something that would be revealed in due time. But for now, the focus was on the battle at hand. "It seems he's chosen me," Vegeta muttered, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His eyes gleamed with anticipation. The thrill of the fight, the challenge that lay ahead, ignited something deep within him. Broly, standing nearby, felt a pang of irritation at being ignored, but he quickly swallowed his pride. He knew better than to challenge Vegeta for this fight. Vegeta was more than capable of handling Abaddon, and Broly respected that. Placing a hand on Vegeta's shoulder, Broly leaned in and spoke in a low, menacing tone. "Make it painful. I want to hear him scream. I want the stench of death to fill the air." With that, Broly turned his attention to Konik, who was standing off to the side, seemingly deep in thought. Konik had heard rumors that the Sign Warriors had been captured by their father, the Grand Priest himself. The fact that Vegeta was here, standing strong and defiant, puzzled him. How could Vegeta have possibly escaped? But before he could delve further into his thoughts, Broly moved. In an instant, Broly closed the distance between them, moving with a speed that was nothing short of astonishing. Konik barely had time to react. The scene was upon him in less than a millisecond, his fist rocketing toward Konik with incredible force. Caught off guard, Konik could only watch as the massive blow came hurtling toward him. However, just as Broly's fist was about to connect, a sphere of pure white energy materialized around Konik, shielding him from the attack. The sphere had formed in response to the danger, acting independently, just like the staff Whis had given to Goku. The protective barrier absorbed the impact of Broly's punch, but the force behind it was so immense that it sent the sphere hurtling backward into a nearby mountain, leveling it in an instant. As the dust settled, Konik emerged from the rubble unscathed, but the look on his face had changed. Gone was the confident smile, replaced by a cold, determined glare. He now realized that this Saiyan, Broly, had been holding back. The time for underestimation was over. Konik's pride as an angel, one of the most powerful among them, flared up. The idea of being forced to the ground, having to look up at a Saiyan, was utterly humiliating. It felt as though he was a lowly creature being looked down upon by its master, and the indignity of it made his blood boil. With a roar of pure fury, Konik unleashed a wave of energy that shook the very fabric of the universe. The roar was like a tidal wave of power, far beyond anything seen before. It wasn't just a sound, it was a force that swept across Universe 7, causing planets to tremble and life forms to faint from the sheer pressure. On Earth, those who were not already unconscious dropped like flies. Even Bulma and most of the Z fighters aboard the ship succumbed to the overwhelming force, their bodies crumpling as they lost consciousness. The only one left standing was Piccolo. His mind, the strongest among them, struggled against the onslaught of Konik's power. He fought to keep himself upright, his knees buckling under the strain. The ship, fortunately, was on autopilot, its course set for Namek, sparing them from drifting aimlessly in space. Piccolo gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of the energy pressing down on him, but he refused to fall. He knew that if he did, all hope might be lost. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way to counter the sheer magnitude of the power that Konik had just unleashed. But for now, all he could do was endure, hoping that Vegeta and Broly could turn the tide before it was too late. Broly froze in his tracks, his massive body locked in place by the overwhelming power of Konik's roar. Though he remained conscious, the force of the attack had clearly shaken him. Even Vegeta and Abaddon, powerful as they were, felt the effect. The sheer pressure of the Angel's energy was undeniable. To think that the Angel was hiding this level of power, Abaddon muttered, his voice laced with disdain. This must be a new technique. The angel never used this during the Great War among demons and chickens, he added with a scornful chuckle, mocking the angelic race with a sneer. Vegeta, his body still reeling from the attack, placed his hand over his heart. He needed to jolt his system back into action. Summoning a charge of lightning, he sent a powerful electric surge coursing through his body, forcing his muscles to respond. The attack had been potent, but Vegeta knew it was necessary. His body had reacted instinctively to the danger, momentarily paralyzed by fear. But Vegeta would not tolerate such weakness. He was in control, and he needed to remind himself of that. Abaddon quickly followed suit, shaking off the effects of the attack. However, Broly was different. Instead of trying to regain control, Broly's anger began to rise, along with his power. Konik watched in growing alarm as Broly's energy continued to spike. "He's hiding even more power," Konik shouted, his voice tinged with disbelief. Or is he learning as he fights? The thought unsettled him. Whatever the cause, Konik knew he had to stop Broly before it was too late. But Broly wasn't like Vegeta or Abaddon. He didn't resist the power surging within him. He embraced it. With a thunderous stomp, Broly made the earth quake beneath him. Dark electricity crackled around his body, his power spiraling out of control. The red fur covering his body began to darken, turning black as Broly tapped into his monstrous side. In an instant, he had transformed, unleashing his most powerful form to date, Dark Super Saiyan 5. This transformation was as dangerous as it was powerful. Broly's bloodlust and thirst for destruction were at their peak, his mind consumed by the berserker rage that came with the form. Although he retained some semblance of control, his personality had shifted dramatically, making him an unpredictable and deadly force. "That monster," Konik whispered, his voice filled with astonishment and fear. Broly's transformation had pushed him beyond anything Konik had expected. "I need to end this fight now," Konik realized. If the battle continued, Broly might become too powerful to defeat. For the first time since the battle began, Konik shifted from a defensive stance to a more aggressive posture. He was ready to strike. But before any action could be taken, the ground beneath them trembled violently. Time had run out, and the countdown to Earth's destruction had reached its final moments. The planet, already on the brink of collapse, erupted in a massive explosion. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. The Earth shattered, the force of the explosion spreading through the void of space like a supernova. The sight was terrifying, as it appeared that everyone on the battlefield had been caught in the blast, swallowed by the cataclysmic destruction. Inside Bulma's ship, a shrill alarm began to blare, jolting the unconscious passengers awake. "No! No! No! No!" Bulma gasped, her heart sinking as she realized what had happened. "The Earth! It's gone!" Vegeta's voice echoed in her mind, a desperate hope clinging to his words. "I hope you're okay." "Are they dead?" Krillin asked, his voice trembling with panic. "Is the universe doomed?" Piccolo, his senses still sharp, quickly scanned for any sign of life. "Wait, I can sense their energy," he said, a look of shock spreading across his face. "They're not dead. I can still feel them." "Broly's alive!" Chi-Lai shouted, her voice filled with a mix of relief and determination. "And Vegeta is too. I know it. There's no way Broly would leave me behind. He promised. We need to have faith in them, and in the plan." As the ship hurtled through space toward planet Namek, the sense of urgency was palpable. His scene shifts dramatically to an ominous, shadowy realm, where the air itself seems heavy with mystery. In the darkness, a figure looms, a towering, ape-like being, its features hidden in the shadows, only the faintest glint of light catching its fierce, gleaming eyes. This creature is unlike anything seen in the known universe, its presence exuding an ancient power that transcends time. He is the true god of the Saiyans, a being who predates even Zeno, the Omni King. This god wasn't created by Zeno. He existed long before, from an era when Zeno's father ruled, alongside Zalama, the dragon god. They were the first, the only two beings crafted without restraint, forged from the raw essence of creation itself. And this particular being, this ancient god, was named Wukong, the Monkey King. The scene shifts again, this time to a dimension beyond comprehension. It is a place that lies outside the three known great dimensions that encompass all universes created by Xeno. Even Xeno himself is unaware of this realm's existence. The air here is thick with a sense of the unknown, the laws of reality bending and warping as if the very fabric of the universe is different. In this strange dimension, we find familiar faces: Broly, Vegeta, Konik, and Abaddon, all standing in stunned silence. They are utterly baffled, their eyes darting around, trying to make sense of their surrounding. None of them knows how they got here, and each one instinctively raises their guard, prepared for anything. Was this some kind of ability? Did someone forcefully teleport me? Konik muttered, his voice laced with confusion and disbelief. He couldn't fathom how such a thing was possible. Konik, an angel of immense power, was supposed to be immune to forced teleportation. Not even his father could move him against his will, like he could with others. Teleportation was his domain, and in that realm, no one stood above him except Xeno himself. He racked his brain, searching for an explanation, but came up empty. He knew that none of the signs could achieve something like this. Sure, they had instant transmission, but that was a mere parlor trick compared to his abilities. His thoughts drifted to the demons, specifically the primordial demon gods, who, like angels, possessed extraordinary powers. But even then, it didn't make sense. How had this worked on him? The others exchanged wary glances, suspicion growing between them. Each one eyed the others, wondering who or what was behind this. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the possibility of sudden violence. Abaddon, seemingly uninterested in the mystery, fixed his gaze back on Vegeta. To him, it didn't matter how they had been brought here. He was convinced that one of them was responsible. But ultimately, his goal remained unchanged. He would kill them all, regardless of who was to blame. Without another word, the battle resumed, the combatants clashing with renewed intensity. The environment may have changed, but their resolve had not. None of them realized they were now fighting in an entirely different reality, one where a being far greater than any of them reigned supreme, watching their every move with unseen eyes. The stakes had just been raised, but the warriors were too focused on survival to grasp the full gravity of their situation. Vegeta stood tall, his posture unwavering, eyes like daggers scanning the devastation around him. The once majestic landscape of Wukong Mountain had been reduced to a war zone, littered with craters that seemed bottomless. The air crackled with energy, thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning earth. Purple flames danced wildly around Vegeta's body, his aura pulsing with the ferocious dark destruction energy of his Ultra Ego 3 form. Each flicker seemed to consume the very air itself, as if reality was bending under the sheer weight of his power. The ground beneath his feet splintered and cracked, unable to withstand the pressure. And yet, his face remained composed, radiating a calm, unshakable confidence that only he could maintain in such chaos. Opposite him stood Abaddon, one of the dreaded primordial demon gods, his towering form casting a long shadow over the battlefield. The creature was monstrous, every inch of him oozing menace. His eyes, a chilling crimson, gleamed with sadistic amusement. That same wicked grin had been plastered across his face since the beginning of their battle, as though he found the destruction amusing, even exhilarating. After being sealed away from the world for so long, the idea of finding a worthy opponent had been an elusive dream for him. But now, finally, he stood face to face with Vegeta, a mortal who had somehow tapped into powers only the primordial demon gods were said to possess. It was what Abaddon had yearned for, and yet Vegeta's expression was anything but pleased. His mind was sharp, focused, and consumed by a singular thought: death. The memory of Gohan's death didn't sit heavy in his chest. It barely registered at all. There was no room for grief. He wasn't sure what had happened to Goku. Was he still alive? The question echoed faintly in his mind, but it didn't matter. Everything was in ruins. His home planet, the one he was born to rule, was gone, obliterated. And now Earth, the place he had come to call home, had met the same fate, destroyed, just as before, all under his watch. How many times could he fail? The thought seared through his mind, but it wasn't grief that drove him. No, it was pride. His pride as a warrior, the unbreakable pride of a Saiyan. He couldn't live with the fact that Goku, of all people, had sacrificed himself for him. The idea that he, the Prince of all Saiyans, needed saving was unbearable. So now, Vegeta stood here for one reason: to prove he was the strongest, to demonstrate the true power of a Saiyan, and, most of all, to show the universe that he, Prince Vegeta, was worthy of his title. "You've been grinning like a fool ever since this fight started," Vegeta growled, his voice low and dangerous, every syllable dripping with menace. "But now, you're going to find out what real power feels like." Abaddon's grin only widened, his amusement clear as ever. "Oh, I've seen your power, Vegeta. It's impressive, I'll give you that. But it's fleeting. Your rage, your strength, it won't last forever. You're only delaying the inevitable." His voice was as dark and hollow as the void itself. "You might possess powers similar to mine, but not all primordial demon gods are created equal. Some of us, well, we're far more powerful than others. And you're just a little mortal. What can you do to a being that was created to be stronger than even the angels?" Vegeta's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes narrowing with an intensity that made the very air around him sizzle. "You think I'm relying on some demon power?" His tone was cold, venomous. "You don't know a thing about what I'm capable of." In an instant, Vegeta vanished. His speed was so great that the sound barrier shattered, the shockwave echoing across the battlefield. Before Abaddon could blink, Vegeta was already in front of him, his body twisting in midair, his foot glowing with the same dark destructive energy that consumed his aura. With a swift, brutal motion, Vegeta unleashed a devastating roundhouse kick that connected directly with Abaddon's side. The impact was deafening, like a thunderclap tearing the heavens apart. Shockwaves rippled outward, obliterating what remained of Wukong Mountain. Massive chunks of earth and rock were torn from the ground, flying through the air as dust and debris filled the sky. The ground itself trembled under the sheer force of Vegeta's attack, as though the planet itself was groaning in pain from the hit. Vegeta wasn't finished. The moment his devastating kick collided with Abaddon, he vanished once more, reappearing high above the demon god with lightning-fast speed. His hands crackled with dark purple energy, swirling and growing until it formed into a massive, glowing sphere. His eyes narrowed, his voice booming through the thick, dust-filled air. "Big Bang Attack!" Vegeta bellowed, hurling the pulsating orb of destruction down toward Abaddon's chest with a ferocity that shook the very air. The impact was enormous. The explosion erupted with a blinding flash of light, the fiery shockwave tearing through the landscape and reducing everything in its path to rubble. Abaddon's massive form was flung backward, slamming into the ground with a force that sent tremors rolling through the crumbling remains of Wukong Mountain. But Vegeta didn't pause to celebrate. Without hesitation, he lifted 2 fingers, locking onto the retreating figure of Abaddon. His eyes flashed with cold determination. "Gaelic Gun!" he shouted, his voice fierce as he unleashed a concentrated beam of purple energy. The attack shot through the sky, tearing the air apart as it hurtled toward Abaddon with terrifying speed. Abaddon, still struggling to rise from the previous blow, raised a hand in defense. The blast slammed into him with full force, sending him skidding backward even further. The ground cracked beneath him as he struggled to maintain his footing. But Vegeta wasn't done yet. In the blink of an eye, he vanished from his spot in the sky and reappeared behind Abaddon. With a swift, brutal motion, Vegeta drove his elbow into the demon's spine, causing a sickening crack to echo across the battlefield. Abaddon let out a sharp gasp of pain, his body jerking forward from the impact. "You're too slow," Vegeta sneered, his voice dripping with superiority. His smirk widened. "How pathetic!" A roar of frustration tore from Abaddon's throat as he swung his massive arm in a wild attempt to catch Vegeta off guard. But the sane prince was already a step ahead, his movements fluid and precise. He ducked beneath the strike with ease, his body moving like a shadow. With a swift, calculated motion, Vegeta delivered a crushing uppercut straight to Abaddon's jaw, sending the demon god staggering back once more. Blood began to trickle from the corner of Abaddon's mouth, but the grin never left his face. If anything, it grew wider. "You're relentless, Vegeta. I'll give you that," Abaddon chuckled darkly, wiping the blood away with the back of his hand. His voice was disturbingly calm, considering the punishment he'd just endured. "But this fight, it's not just about brute strength, is it? There's something else at play here." Vegeta's eyes narrowed, his instincts screaming at him that something was wrong. The feeling gnawed at him like a warning in the back of his mind, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Abaddon should be on the ground by now, beaten to a pulp, but he wasn't. Vegeta's attacks, fueled by the destructive power of Ultra Ego 3, were more than enough to wipe out any opponent. Yet, Abaddon was still standing, still grinning. "What are you up to?" Vegeta muttered under his breath, his mind racing with possibilities. Outwardly, however, he remained calm, his expression betraying none of the uncertainty he felt. His eyes locked onto Abaddon, cold and focused. "I'll end this now," Vegeta declared, his voice steady and filled with resolve. In an instant, he dashed forward once again, but this time, he wasn't going for another barrage of physical strikes. His body twisted mid-air, every motion deliberate and precise. As he spun, energy began to gather in his hands, golden light bursting forth from his palms. He wasn't holding back anymore. "Final flash!" he roared, thrusting both hands forward as the massive blast of energy surged toward Abaddon with overwhelming force. But just as the beam was about to connect, something unexpected happened. Vegeta's energy faltered, his glowing aura flickered and dimmed, and before he could react, his Ultra Ego 3 form dropped. The raw power that had coursed through him just moments ago vanished in an instant, leaving him in his regular Ultra Ego form. Vegeta's eyes widened in shock as the final flash dissipated, canceled out as though it had never existed. He hovered in the air, momentarily stunned. Confusion etched across his face. "What?" Vegeta yelled, his voice filled with disbelief. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was racing even faster. How could this be happening? He had mastered the Ultra Ego 3 form, pushed himself beyond every limit. So why had it failed him now? "But how?" he muttered under his breath, his confidence shaken for the first time in the battle. Abaddon's laughter echoed across the battlefield, dark and menacing. As he rose to his feet, his body appeared completely unharmed by Vegeta's relentless attacks, his power now more dangerous than ever. The wicked grin never left his face as he dusted himself off, the aura around him growing thicker, more suffocating. It was as if the very air was bending to his will. "You're strong, Vegeta," Abaddon said, his voice twisted with cruel amusement. "I won't deny that, but there's something you failed to understand." His dark energy flared, rippling through the sky like a living shadow. "You've been feeding me this whole time." His grin widened, his crimson eyes gleaming with malice. "Unlike you and those false demons you call gods of destruction, we true demon gods possess something far superior, dark siphoning. The more damage we take, the stronger we become. Every blow you land just makes me more powerful." Abaddon's grin grew even more unsettling as he stared Vegeta down. "So you see, you can't beat me." Vegeta's expression remained stoic, but inside, his mind raced. Dark siphoning. Where have I heard that before? The term nagged at him, familiar yet distant. Then, it hit him like a bolt of lightning. His thoughts flashed back to one of the most brutal battles he had faced, a fight against Arak, the god of destruction of Universe 5. Arak had used a similar ability, transforming into something monstrous that had taken all of Vegeta's strength to overcome. "Yes," Vegeta muttered under his breath, the memory crystallizing. Arak had the same troublesome ability. Could these beings be connected? Everything about Abaddon, his power, his aura, felt eerily similar. Vegeta clenched his fists, focusing on the subtle drain he felt with each punch. He's not just enduring my attacks, he's absorbing them. But then, something snapped inside Vegeta. Instead of frustration, a dark laugh rumbled up from his chest. The sound filled the air, causing the ground to shake beneath them. "You think I can't defeat you?" Vegeta's voice dripped with scorn. "What a joke. I've already destroyed a being with the same abilities as yours before." His eyes gleamed with confidence, and his smirk returned, full of defiance. "This dark siphoning you're so proud of has weaknesses. Weaknesses I've already exploited once, and trust me, I'm far stronger now than I was when I killed him." Abaddon's face didn't change. That conniving smile still etched in place, but Vegeta could sense a flicker of unease behind those red eyes. "To show you how little of a threat you pose," Vegeta continued, pointing directly at Abaddon, "I'll break down your ability's flaws right here." He took a breath, his voice carrying over the desolate battlefield. Number 1. Dark siphoning only works on divine beings, or those who possess God Ki. It doesn't work on mortals without God Ki. but users of this ability become overconfident, thinking that no mortal could ever reach the power needed to defeat a demon god without God Kai. Isn't that right? Vegeta's words cut through the air like a blade. Abaddon's grin faltered for a moment, but then he chuckled, shaking his head. You're aware of Arak, I see. He played a big part in our plan to escape that damned prison. Prison? Plans? Vegeta's voice grew sharper as his eyes narrowed, focusing on Abaddon. As I suspected, everything that's happened up until now, this entire war, has been manipulated by someone. But who? His thoughts churned. It's all connected. Why did the gods suddenly turn on Kakarot? Vegeta muttered to himself, trying to piece together the puzzle. And that strange aura that invaded my body? What was that? Why did Zeno only take it instead of wiping us out? Why are these demon gods here in the first place? Abaddon's cryptic words only deepened Vegeta's suspicions. Someone or something is behind all of this. It felt like their every move had been guided, their every action part of some larger scheme. But by whom? Zeno? The primordial demon gods? There were too many unanswered questions, and it gnawed at Vegeta's mind like an unsolved riddle. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play than what he could see, that he and the others were merely pawns in a larger, more dangerous game. But Vegeta's focus never wavered. His fists clenched tighter, his resolve hardening. Whoever or whatever was pulling the strings, Vegeta was determined to find out. He'd fought countless enemies, overcome impossible odds, and he wasn't about to let anyone control his fate. Not Zeno, not the demon gods, and certainly not Abaddon. Abaddon interrupted Vegeta's thoughts, his voice laced with condescension. Arak, the son of Azazel, the demon with the blood of both a demon and an angel. That boy had such raw talent. If the angels hadn't interfered, he could have been a powerhouse, possibly stronger than all of us primordial demon gods. Abaddon paused, grinning darkly. But I guess it wasn't his destiny. Still, he served his purpose. It was thanks to him that we escaped. His eyes gleamed as he continued, dismissing the memory. But enough about him. The past is the past. Abaddon's grin widened, his laughter filling the air as he clutched his stomach. What's more interesting, Vegeta, is your confidence. You really believe that just because you defeated Arak, the same outcome awaits me? He shook his head, laughing harder. Arak was nothing more than a child. A strong child, yes, but still immature in his powers. Tell me, Saiyan, do you find pleasure in defeating a mere child? Vegeta's eyes blazed with intensity. A being who's millions of years old is still considered a child? He thought, his lips curling slightly in disgust. The absurdity of it all weighed on him. Abaddon continued, his tone now more serious. Arak may have had the potential to surpass us, but that's all it was, potential. We are primordial beings, Vegeta. Beings that have been alive for millennia upon millennia. We've honed our strength for ages, and you'll soon find that the weaknesses Arak had won't apply to us. As for not being able to siphon mortal energy, yes, you're right, he scoffed. But do you truly think a mere mortal could ever possess the power necessary to defeat someone like me? How foolish can you be? Vegeta, unbothered, let out a laugh of his own. He pointed across the battlefield to where Broly was locked in a fierce battle with Konak. That Saiyan you see over there is a mortal with God Ki. You felt his power yourself, haven't you? I'm confident that even without God Kai, he could take you down with ease. But don't worry, Vegeta added with a smirk. He won't intervene. He knows I want to wipe that smug look off your face myself. And I'm going to prove to you that your dark siphon technique is no match for mine. Abaddon's eyes narrowed, intrigued. What do you mean? He asked. His attention suddenly peaked. Vegeta's smirk deepened, his eyes gleaming with dangerous confidence. I have a strength absorption technique of my own, Abaddon. You call yourself superior? Don't make me laugh. The Saiyan race has no equal. We are the pinnacle of strength, the only race that can continuously break its limits. You're bluffing, Abaddon growled, his grin fading as he unfolded his arms and prepared for battle. His instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. He could sense danger now, an unsettling shift in the atmosphere. Vegeta's expression darkened. His eyes locked onto Abaddon as his voice dropped to a menacing tone. You don't know a thing about us Saiyans. After all, our race didn't even exist in your time. His body lowered into a fighting stance, his muscles tensing for the next move. But let me show you something I've picked up along the way. Without warning, Vegeta's energy changed. His aura shimmered, glowing with a strange, unfamiliar light. His hands moved in slow, deliberate circles, and for the first time, Abaddon's arrogant grin faltered. Something was off, something dangerous. Sensing the threat, Abaddon acted without hesitation. His fist shot forward with speed beyond comprehension. Less than a nanosecond later, his blow connected squarely with Vegeta's face. The force of the punch sent Vegeta flying back, crashing through the air as if he weighed nothing. Vegeta struggled to slow his descent, his fingers clawing at the air for balance, but the impact was too powerful. He smashed into the planet's surface, sending plumes of lava erupting from the ground beneath him, the ground cracking like fragile glass. Abaddon hovered above the impact site, a smug smile forming on his lips. Pathetic, he muttered, convinced he had called Vegeta's bluff. But as his gaze drifted down to where Vegeta had landed, a sudden jolt of terror gripped him. His aura flickered, dimming for just a moment, before stabilizing again. A chill ran down his spine. "Impossible!" Abaddon roared. "My energy! It's being taken! What has he done?" Panic began to creep into his voice. Dark Siphon was supposed to be the ultimate technique, created specifically to counter the angels. No being with divine energy should be able to harm him while this technique was active. It was perfect. It had brought countless angels to their knees, draining their strength and making him stronger with every blow. Yet now, standing on the edge of a terrifying realization, Abaddon's belief in his technique was crumbling. How could there be a technique that's superior to dark siphoning? He refused to accept it. His mind raced, searching for an explanation for any possible reason why his technique was failing him. Then, from the crater, Vegeta rose unscathed, brushing the dust from his armor. A wicked smile spread across his face, his confidence unshaken. He looked as though he hadn't taken any damage at all. "That's not possible," Abaddon muttered, the fear now fully settling into his voice as Vegeta stood tall, his power radiating like a beacon. Again, his voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and unforgiving. "You're dead," he growled. In the blink of an eye, Vegeta used instant transmission, teleporting directly in front of Abaddon. Before the demon god could react, Vegeta grabbed his face with a crushing grip and slammed him violently into the planet's surface. The impact shook the ground, cracks spiderwebbing out from where Abaddon's head made contact, and a geyser of blood gushed from the demon's mouth. Abaddon's body twitched as more of his power drained from him. The situation was growing dire, and it was clear that dark siphoning, his once invincible technique, was completely useless against Vegeta. The reason for this was twofold. Vegeta had an edge, thanks to the unique combination of his abilities. The first was his Ultra Ego Form's passive trait, which allowed him to grow stronger with every hit he endured. The more damage Abaddon dealt, the more powerful Vegeta became. The second was Vegeta's mastery of spirit fission, a technique he'd learned from the Namekian Elder, allowing him to take energy from anyone he touched or anyone who touched him. It didn't matter that Abaddon's dark siphoning was draining Vegeta's energy, because Vegeta was taking it back, along with even more. The scales were tipped dramatically in Vegeta's favor. It was a battle Abaddon was destined to lose. Vegeta, still holding Abaddon's face pressed into the ground, spoke with chilling finality. "Your time alive is up," he said, his voice calm and resolute. He raised his free hand, charging up a final flash. The golden energy surged in his palm, growing brighter by the second, as Vegeta prepared to end the fight for good. The scene abruptly shifted, cutting to the fierce battle between Dark Super Saiyan 5 Broly and Full Power Konik. Their clash was a spectacle of raw power, as if two planets had collided in the sky. But it was clear that Konik, despite his immense strength, was on the losing end. Broly's power was overwhelming, and worse, it was increasing at an alarming rate with every second that passed. Boom! The air cracked as Broly delivered a brutal punch to Konik's gut. The sound of the blow echoed like thunder across the battlefield. Konik's eyes bulged in shock, the force of Broly's fist nearly ripping through his stomach. But the blow wasn't enough to take the angel down. Clutching onto Broly's arm, Konik grimaced in pain before vanishing in an instant, using teleportation to escape. They reappeared, flickering across the battlefield in a blur of motion. Konik, now desperate, hatched a plan. He summoned his staff, much like Goku had once done when he wielded Whis' staff. The staff shot into the planet's atmosphere, floating above the chaos of the battlefield. Then, it began to work its magic. The staff had been designed to absorb all the energy radiating from battles, whether it was divine or mortal. It pulled in the energy from both Vegeta's fight with Abaddon and his own struggle with Broly, gathering it into one massive, concentrated source of power. As the staff absorbed this energy, it funneled it directly into Konik, strengthening him with every passing second. His power skyrocketed, his aura swelling with renewed vigor. The angel's eyes gleamed as he felt the surge of energy rushing through his body. Victory, it seemed, was within reach. But something unexpected happened, something even Konik hadn't foreseen. The staff was designed to absorb energy, yes, but it was never meant for a place like this. This wasn't just any battlefield. It wasn't even in the 3 dimensions overseen by Zeno, the Omni King. This was the 4th dimension, the realm of Wukong, a celestial being who had killed countless gods, a being who ruled over this dimension far outside the control of the Omni King. Here, the rules were different, and the power that lingered from Wukong's battles still radiated in the air. Konik's staff, oblivious to the nature of this realm, began to absorb that power as well. The energy of Wukong's past battles, power that far surpassed anything in the known multiverse, started flooding into Konik's body. His energy spiked rapidly, far beyond what his body was used to handling. It was an overload, a surge of power so intense that even Konik, one of the strongest angels, began to struggle to contain it. His aura exploded outward, growing wildly out of control as the power from this strange dimension forced its way into him, threatening to tear him apart from within. Konik's grip tightened around Broly's arm, the raw power behind it sending waves of pain coursing through Broly's body. The Saiyan let out a primal roar, his voice echoing through the battlefield as the angel's strength overpowered him, causing him to stagger. With a swift, almost effortless motion, Konik swung Broly like a bat, hurling him through the sky. Broly's body shot across space at the speed of light, crashing into a nearby planet with devastating force. The impact caused the entire planet to tremble for a brief moment before it exploded in a blinding flash of light and fire. The sound of the explosion echoed through the void like a bomb going off, and even from where they stood, the fiery glow of the blast could be seen. Broly was caught in the explosion, his powerful form lost in the chaos of destruction. Suddenly, Konik, who had been so calm and composed, began clutching his head in agony. This is too much power, he gasped, his voice trembling. Where is all of this energy coming from? He stretched his arm out, signaling for the power to stop, desperate to control the flood of energy surging into him. But as he looked toward his staff, his eyes widened in disbelief. The staff, a symbol of divine authority, had begun to crack. The once perfect orb at its top shattered into pieces, and before Konik could react, the entire staff disintegrated in his hands, crumbling into dust. The angel's face dropped in shock. This was impossible. The staff held enough power to erase an entire universe effortlessly. Nothing should have been able to destroy it, and yet, the overwhelming energy had consumed it entirely. For a moment, the battlefield went silent as the enormity of what had just happened sank in. The fighting seemed to stop. Even Vegeta, in the midst of his battle with Abaddon, glanced over, sensing something had shifted. Konik fell to his knees, clutching his head in both hands, his screams of pain filling the air. What is happening to me?" he yelled in agony. Then, a voice spoke directly into Konik's mind, cold and commanding. "How dare you drain my power? How dare you seal my energy along with your own? And most importantly, how dare you try to destroy my vessel?" The voice was filled with a fury that made even the mighty angel tremble. Konik's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. This was no ordinary dimension, no battlefield under the rule of Zeno, the Omni King. This was something far beyond his understanding. The scene shifted abruptly to a sacred place deep within Wukong's mountain. The air was thick with an ancient energy, and at the center of it all lay a familiar figure, Broly, now in his base form, unconscious and surrounded by a village of monkeys. These were no ordinary creatures. They were the people of Wukong, the celestial monkey king. Broly's survival had been nothing short of miraculous. The force of the planet's explosion should have wiped him out entirely. But in the instant before the blast, Broly had tapped into something beyond even his wildest potential. He had briefly transformed into the fabled Super Saiyan 6, the final form prophesied in the ancient Namekian book of legend. The energy he had unleashed was like nothing seen before. It matched the intense radiation and gamma burst from the exploding planet and even overpowered it, as if Broly's transformation was a sentient force, absorbing and consuming the planet's destruction. It was a power so incredible, it seemed to defy the laws of reality. What the ancient Book of Legends had failed to mention, however, was that this form, Super Saiyan 6, was more than just a final transformation. It was the same state that Wukong, the Monkey King, had achieved before he attained true nirvana. Before Wukong became omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, this was the form he had taken. And now, Broly a Saiyan had reached it. The Saiyan race, it seemed, was directly descended from Wukong's lineage. In another part of the multiverse, within the towering palace of the Omni King, the Grand Priest stood in silent contemplation. Though this dimension was hidden, one that even he had not been aware of, he could feel its presence. Through Conic, the Grand Priest could sense the immense life force that had surged through the angel's body. The energy that had coursed through Conic was like nothing he had ever encountered. Even the Grand Priest, with all his power, had struggled to control it. He had felt it surge into him as well, though he had managed to keep it at bay for now. But that brief moment of instability had frightened him, a feeling he was not accustomed to. Then, something unexpected happened. An infinite symbol appeared on the Grand Priest's forehead, glowing with a strange light. In that instant, every remaining angel across the multiverse began to break down into pure energy. Margarita, Vados, Conic, and all the other angels were engulfed in a brilliant flash of light, their forms dissolving into energy particles. The beams of light shot through the multiverse, traveling at unimaginable speeds, converging toward the palace of the Omni King. Within seconds, the energy had made its way back to the Grand Priest. The surge of power slammed into him, the force of it nearly overwhelming. It was as if all the energy from the angels had been returned to its original source, back to him, the one from whom they had all been created. The scene shifted to the palace of the Grand Priest, the Daishinkan, standing still, his face uncharacteristically tense. For the first time in eons, something had unsettled him. As the energy of the angels flowed back into his body, he felt a surge of memories, experiences, and power, but it came with something new, something unexpected. What was that? The Grand Priest muttered, his usual calm demeanor cracking as he struggled to make sense of the energy he had absorbed. His mind raced, trying to process the unfamiliar sensation. No, not what. Who was that? His brow furrowed as he scanned the multiverse for any sign of the source. Where is that dimension? I have no recollection of it. His voice trailed off, and his eyes narrowed in concentration. Placing 2 fingers on his forehead, the Grand Priest attempted to reach out to Zeno-sama, the Omni King. But as he focused, a realization hit him. Zeno wasn't in this dimension. The Omni King had recently traveled to the 2nd dimension, where Quanzi resided. Quanzi, the last 10% of the Daishinkan's power, the part that made him whole, had been left in that realm for reasons only the Grand Priest fully understood. The angels weren't just ordinary beings, a fact few knew. In reality, the angels were fragments of the Grand Priest's own soul, split into pieces to help him manage the vast multiverse. Each angel was a part of him, carrying out their duties across the different universes, but they weren't true living beings. This was why angels couldn't be erased in the traditional sense. During the Tournament of Power, when universes were wiped from existence, the angels had remained, because erasing them would weaken the Grand Priest himself. They were simply extensions of him, and destroying an angel meant removing a fraction of his own strength. Even the law of the angels, the one that stated an angel would be erased if they intervened in mortal affairs, wasn't entirely accurate. If an angel overstepped, they wouldn't truly die. They would merely return to the Grand Priest's essence. That's why the Daishinkan didn't react when Whis had acted on his own, because Whis was simply a fragment of his soul that could return at any time. However, something was different now. The Grand Priest had felt a disturbance unlike anything before, something powerful enough to make him pause. 2 of the angels had been killed by Vegeta, and their deaths had caused him to lose strength temporarily. The energy from those angels was supposed to return over time, as it always had, but something had disrupted the balance. This cannot be, he whispered to himself. He had no choice but to reclaim a vast portion of his power, 90% of his full strength, to prepare for whatever was coming. And now, his full power was even greater than before. enhanced by the experiences and training of the angels scattered throughout the multiverse. Each fragment of his soul had gathered knowledge, power, and wisdom over time, all of it feeding back into the Daishinkan like a complex network of information. He was the main processor, the center of it all, but something had reached out from a place he had never known existed, and it shook him. The Grand Priest closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing thoughts. No dimension in this multiverse could contain that power. What is this place? He could feel the pull of the unknown dimension, the one hidden from even his vast knowledge. The angels, unaware of their true origins, believed they were born just like any other being. Yet they were all created by the Grand Priest himself, each with a specific role, carrying out responsibilities across the multiverse. Despite having their own personalities and free will, their destinies were always tied to the Daishinkan. The angels served their purpose, and eventually, all their experiences, all their power would return to him. That was the plan from the beginning. Kwanzai, known as the Mother of all Angels, was the last fragment of the Daishinkan's essence that had not yet returned. She was more than just another angel. She was the final piece of the puzzle, the part that would make the Grand Priest complete once again. But she had a critical role, one that could not be interrupted. Kwanzai's task was to guard the Heartstone, a powerful artifact placed within her being. This stone was the key to unlocking the Eternal Realm, where Zeno resided. It was the final step in a grand trial, one that even the Grand Priest had yet to fully comprehend. Without the Heartstone, access to Zeno's realm would be impossible, and the multiverse would be left vulnerable. And now, with Zeno in the second dimension, the Grand Priest felt a new sense of urgency. Something was moving, something beyond his control, and the Grand Priest could no longer take chances. "This is far more dangerous than I anticipated," the Grand Priest murmured, lowering his hand from his forehead. His mind spun as he pieced together the events. Wukong's dimension, Broly, Vegeta's growing strength, the angels dissolving into energy. He stood silent for a moment before a realization hit him like a tidal wave. There was a force beyond the multiverse, one that even Zeno was unaware of. With a deep breath, the Grand Priest made a decision. He had to act. Whatever was coming, he could no longer stay on the sidelines. The scene shifted abruptly to a dark, cold room, far beneath the palace of the Omni King. It wasn't a simple prison cell. It was a place of hopelessness, deep beneath the layers of existence itself. There, in heavy chains, sat someone all too familiar, Goku. He had been stripped of his Omni form after Zeno, the Omni King, removed the sacred aquafoam that had once empowered him. Now he was a prisoner, shackled and broken, captured by none other than the Daishinkan, the Grand Priest. But that wasn't the worst of it. No, the Grand Priest was much more twisted than that. In the corner of the dim cell floated a glowing orb, flickering with images Goku couldn't escape. The orb's cruel purpose was clear. It replayed the devastation of Earth over and over again. Goku had no choice but to watch as his home planet exploded, the fiery blast ripping it apart. He watched as his family, Chi-Chi, Goten, and even his friends, were all engulfed by the explosion. He believed they were gone, every single one of them, though he didn't know that they had actually escaped. His senses, normally so sharp, were dull in this realm, too weak to detect life from such a distant place. After all, Zeno's planet was located in the center of the three non-dimensions, far removed from the physical realm. Every time the explosion played, it felt like another knife in Goku's heart. He had fought so hard, risked everything to protect his world and the people he loved. But now, as far as he knew, it had all been for nothing. Even Vegeta, his fierce rival and closest ally, had perished along with Broly, whom Goku had lost track of during their separation. He had no idea what became of them. His heart raced, pounding in his chest as his mind spun. Anger surged through his veins like molten lava, bubbling up with an intensity he had never felt before. His eyes, normally so calm, now brimmed with tears of frustration and rage. He could feel power building inside of him, raw and untamed, but it was useless. The chains wrapped around his body weren't just any chains. No, these were forged by the Grand Priest himself, specifically to contain beings of unimaginable strength. In fact, these very chains had once been used to hold an entire universe, Universe 18, before Zeno had transferred it into his pocket dimension. The chains were universal, and no ordinary force could break them. And right now, Goku was far too weak to even try. Trapped in the silence of his cell, Goku's gaze remained fixed on the ground as he continued to watch the horrifying scene repeat endlessly in the orb. Earth exploded again and again and again. The Grand Priest had ensured this punishment was not just physical. It was mental torture of the highest order. "How can I reverse this?" Goku muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way out, but the situation seemed impossible. The Dragon Balls were gone, and with them, any chance of undoing the destruction of Earth. Even if he could somehow survive for 1,000 years, the time it would take for the Dragon Balls to be restored, it wouldn't matter. The Earth was destroyed, and with it, the Dragon Balls were lost forever. At that moment, the door to his cell creaked open, casting a long shadow into the room. The Grand Priest stepped in, his eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. His lips twisted into a mocking smirk as he approached Goku. "Enjoying the show?" the Grand Priest asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He walked slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, as he circled Goku like a predator playing with its prey. "Well, it seems your chances of escape have dropped even further," he sneered, his cold gaze locking onto Goku's slumped form. Goku didn't respond, his fists clenched in silent fury. He could feel the weight of the Grand Priest's words pressing down on him, the hopelessness of his situation settling in deeper. "No one is coming to save you," the Grand Priest continued, his tone laced with condescension. "Not even your fellow Saiyan. It's almost poetic, don't you think?" He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You fought so hard to protect them, and now, well, let's just say you're all alone." But what the Grand Priest wasn't revealing, at least not yet, was the truth. The Saiyans weren't dead. He had discovered this when Konik, a being made from his essence, had returned back to him. Upon Konik's return, all of their knowledge, memories, power, and experience had transferred directly to the Grand Priest. Through this link, the Grand Priest had learned the truth. The Saiyans had been forcefully teleported to an unknown dimension, one that Zeno himself had no control over. The Grand Priest chuckled softly to himself, reveling in Goku's despair, knowing that the truth was even more complex and cruel than Goku could imagine. And yet, Goku sat in silence, unaware of this revelation. His mind was a storm of grief, anger, and helplessness, trapped in a prison of both body and soul. The Grand Priest stood still, deep in thought, his usual confidence shaken. For some reason, he couldn't locate the universe where the Saiyans had been sent. The memories he absorbed from Konik were no help either. Konik, who prided himself on being the most skilled in teleportation techniques, was just as confused. His mind had been in total shock when it happened. He had no idea where he had been sent, who had done it, or even what kind of force could have created such a dimension. This baffled even the Grand Priest. After all, Konik was the top when it came to teleportation, a skill the Grand Priest had passed down to him. The 18 angels, who had once served the 18 gods of destruction in their respective universes, each possessed a dominant trait of the Grand Priest. They were extensions of his power, fragments of his incredible abilities. Vados held his raw strength, Whis carried his wisdom, and Konik mastered his teleportation. Together, they had made up the divine forces that maintained balance in the multiverse. However, when Zeno erased 5 of those universes, the Grand Priest's power had become fractured. But now, with all the angels returning to him, the Grand Priest was whole again. He should have been unstoppable, and yet no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pinpoint this mysterious dimension. It was as if it didn't exist within any known realm. His frustration grew. Normally, he would report something this serious to the Omni King, Zeno. But Zeno was currently in the second dimension, a place beyond the Grand Priest's reach. The only way to access that realm was through the Fountain of Creation, which could only be activated with aquafoam, a rare substance that had already been used. The Grand Priest was stuck. Communicating with Zeno was impossible until he returned, and the Grand Priest wasn't one to wait. With no other options, he decided to handle this on his own. Before leaving Goku's cell, the Grand Priest gave him one final mocking gesture. He patted Goku on the head, a move that stung like salt in a wound. As he turned to walk out, he implanted a thought deep into Goku's mind, cementing the belief that everyone Goku loved was dead. The orb in the corner of the room, which showed the explosion of Earth, made it all the more convincing. "Goodbye, Goku," the Grand Priest said over his shoulder. "Enjoy the memories." Goku's body trembled with rage, his muscles tensed, and his energy spiked. But the chains, the ones created by the Grand Priest himself, drained his power just as quickly as it rose. No matter how much he tried to summon his strength, the chains clamped down tighter, sapping his ki like a leech. His mind was a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and loss. He had lost his Omniform, just as Vegeta had. Zeno's intervention had stripped them of that incredible power, and with that loss came a devastating realization. Both of them had lost control of a portion of their strength. The Omniform had once given Goku control over Universe 7. As the Omni King's chosen protector, Goku could draw energy from every living being in the entire universe. It was a well of limitless power, enough to break the chains that now bound him. But that power was gone, locked away deep inside him, dormant. It wasn't impossible to regain it, but it would require 10 times the effort of what it took to master the form originally. Without the Aquafoam to aid him, the path to reclaiming the Omniform seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to a cold, metallic ship cutting through the vastness of space. This wasn't the ship the Z-Warriors had escaped on. This was something else. Inside the capsule ship, 2 figures sat quietly. Frieza, his eyes gleaming with malice, and Beerus, the god of destruction, were on a mission of their own. They had one goal: find the Supreme Kai. Beerus had narrowly escaped death when Konik had almost taken his life earlier, but the cost was great. His divinity had been severed, leaving him vulnerable. Now, the only way to restore his power was to reunite with the Supreme Kai, his other half. Beerus leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed in frustration. "I can't believe I'm reduced to this," he muttered. Frieza, sitting across from him, gave a wicked grin. "It must sting, doesn't it, Lord Beerus? Knowing your fate is tied to someone so fragile." He chuckled darkly, clearly enjoying Beerus's predicament. Beerus scowled. "Quiet, Frieza. I'll deal with you after I handle this." Frieza raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. He knew better than to push Beerus too far, especially now when the god of destruction was on edge. Beerus's thoughts drifted back to his current situation. Originally, his life force had been linked to the Elder Supreme Kai, the most powerful of the Supreme Kais. But that was long ago, before Beerus had sealed him inside the Z-Sword. Once the Elder Kai was sealed, a new Supreme Kai had risen, Shin, who was only a Supreme Kai in training at the time. When Shin took the Elder Kai's place, Beerus's divinity and life force became linked to him instead. It infuriated Beerus to no end. Shin was weak compared to the Elder Kai, and knowing that his life was now tied to someone so vulnerable made Beerus feel trapped. There was no escaping it. If Shin were to die, Beerus would be dragged down with him. He had no choice but to coexist with this reality. As the ship continued to move through space, Beerus clenched his fist, his mind racing. Finding the Supreme Kai was his only option if he wanted to regain his divinity. Beerus reclined in his seat, arms crossed, his golden eyes fixed on the distant stars beyond the ship's window. Despite his calm exterior, his mind was churning. His journey to the sacred world of the Kais wasn't just about regaining his lost divinity by reuniting with Shin, the Supreme Kai. He had another, more pressing concern gnawing at him. Whis, the angel, his trusted advisor, had always been at his side, until now. There was something off about Whis' disappearance, something that didn't sit right with Beerus. The new world, the rebellion, the Saiyans' uprising, everything had spiraled into chaos, while Beerus had been sealed away, powerless to intervene. And now, Whis was missing. Konik had said something about Whis being gone, but Beerus couldn't bring himself to believe it. The angel couldn't be dead. He refused to believe it. The ship they were on, a sleek capsule corp model, was streaking through the universe at an alarming speed, hurtling toward its destination, the sacred world of the Kais. The map on the ship's dashboard indicated that they were less than 2 days away. But even with the ship's incredible velocity, Beerus felt the weight of time bearing down on him. He was impatient to see Shin, to confront him and demand answers. Answers about Whis, about the rebellion, about the Saiyans, about everything that had spiraled out of control during his absence. Beerus scowled. The universe had changed so much in his time sealed away, and not for the better. The Saiyans had started a rebellion, a war that had engulfed entire systems. Goku, Vegeta, and the rest of the Saiyans had defied the very order of the universe, turning everything upside down. And Whis should have been there, at Beerus' side, to help him make sense of it all. Yet, he was nowhere to be found. The god of destruction couldn't shake the feeling that something catastrophic had happened, and the thought filled him with a rare sense of dread. Across the cabin, another figure stood, staring out into the infinite void of space, Emperor Frieza. His silhouette, sharp and regal, was framed by the stars. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he gazed out, but the look in his eyes was far from serene. Frieza's thoughts were as dark as the expanse before him. The Emperor had spent years, 10 long, grueling years, training in that cursed realm. He had poured every ounce of his will into pushing beyond his limits, attaining his newest form, Black Frieza, a form that should have granted him the ultimate power to crush the Saiyans once and for all. He had trained for this very moment, to finally rid himself of the Saiyan race, to destroy Goku, Vegeta, Broly, and the rest of their kind. But things hadn't gone according to plan. Frieza's grip tightened as he recalled the moment when his ambitions had been shattered yet again. Beerus, despite his loss of divinity, was still more powerful than Frieza's black form, and Broly, that monstrous Saiyan, was even more terrifying than Frieza had anticipated. The sight of Broly's raw, untamed power had made Frieza's skin crawl. For all the strength he had gained, for all the sacrifices and the endless training, he still couldn't overcome the Saiyans. The thought infuriated him. His body trembled, not with fear, but with seething anger. The Saiyans, those filthy monkeys, a race he had once ruled over, had now surpassed him. It was unthinkable. It was unacceptable. He, Emperor Frieza, had always been their superior, their ruler, and yet now he was weaker than them. Weaker than Goku, than Vegeta, than even Broly. It was an insult to everything he stood for. Frieza's smile twisted into a sneer, his golden eyes narrowing as he stared out into the darkness. He had accepted Beerus's offer for a reason, the role of God of Destruction. The thought of it excited him. He had seen firsthand how Toppo's strength had magnified during the Tournament of Power, how his destructive power had reached new heights after he embraced his role as the God of Destruction for Universe 11. Frieza could only imagine what kind of power he would gain from assuming such a position for Universe 7. "I've seen what the title of God of Destruction can do," Frieza muttered under his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I combine that power with my own potential, with my talent," his smile grew wider as the possibilities unfolded in his mind. The God of Destruction's power, combined with his own formidable strength and genius, would be unstoppable. The Saiyans, no matter how strong they became, would fall before him. And not just Goku, Vegeta, or Broly, all of them. Frieza's eyes gleamed with ambition. The Saiyans' offspring, their friends, their entire legacy. He would wipe them all out. And then, when the universe was rid of the Saiyans, Frieza wouldn't stop there. No, his ambitions were far greater than just Universe 7. He had set his sights on the multiverse itself. He would rise above the gods, above the Kais, above even the Omni King if it were possible. In his mind, it was fitting. After all, who could be more deserving of such power than he, the Emperor of the Universe? "Mark my words, Saiyans," Frieza whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "I will kill you all someday." As the ship hurtled through space toward its destination, Frieza's smile remained, twisted and dark, as his ambitions soared to new, terrifying heights. The scene shifted to a completely different universe, Universe 6, the domain ruled by none other than Lord Champa himself. In his palace, the God of Destruction sat at a massive banquet table, surrounded by food, his favorite pastime. But despite the usual feast spread before him, something was different. There was a tense air in the room, and Champa's face was twisted in confusion, his usual carefree attitude overshadowed by the troubling thoughts racing through his mind. Next to him stood Hit, the legendary assassin, his expression as unreadable as ever, and the Saiyans from planet Sandal, Kaba, Kefla, and the rest, who had all gathered to hear what was happening. This wasn't a casual gathering, this was war. Champa had barely escaped the fury of the Saiyans, and the truth of the situation weighed heavily on him. It wasn't just Goku and Vegeta. The Saiyans had started a rebellion, unlike anything Champa had seen before, and they had already claimed the lives of gods. He owed his narrow escape to Belmod, another god of destruction who had since been captured by Azazel, one of the primordial demon gods. It was chaos, and no one truly knew how it had gotten this bad so quickly. Champa, as usual, tried to take comfort in food. But even as he stuffed his face with Earth's delicacies, his thoughts were miles away. What disturbed him most was what had happened to Vados, his angel. He had seen something no god was ever meant to see. One moment, Vados was at his side, calm as always, and then she transformed into pure energy, shooting off into space with a look of absolute confusion on her face. She didn't know what was happening to her, and neither did Champa. The moment haunted him. Was that death? He mumbled between bites, though the thought seemed absurd to him. Angels weren't supposed to die, yet he couldn't deny what he had seen. His mind kept drifting back to the possibility. After all, hadn't 2 angels already been killed by the Saiyans? He had tried reaching out to her, but there had been no answer, no presence, just silence. All he could remember were her last words. "Take care of yourself, Lord Champa." Frustration bubbled up inside him, and suddenly he slammed his fist on the table, food flying everywhere. "What is going on here?" he roared, his voice echoing through the grand hall. The Saiyans at his side jumped at the outburst. Champa continued to rant, his anger rising. What are the Grand Priest and Zeno doing? Do they not plan to intervene? He had asked Vados these very questions before she disappeared, but she had never given him a clear answer. Now he was left in the dark, unsure of what to do next. "Lord Champa," Hit spoke up, his voice steady but calm. "You said the Saiyans were coming here to kill you, but I find it hard to believe that Goku would do something like that." Kaba quickly nodded in agreement, stepping forward. "Yeah, Master Vegeta isn't the type to attack without reason. This doesn't make sense." Champa's eyes bulged with anger, and a thick vein popped out on his forehead. "Shut your mouths!" he bellowed, slamming his fists on the table again. "How dare you question me? You are my playthings, and you will do as I say." His outburst stunned everyone into silence, but Champa wasn't done. He continued, his voice dripping with panic and anger as he lied through his teeth. "The Saiyans have turned. They attacked without warning. They've already killed 10 gods of destruction, including Belmont." Kaba, Hit, Kefla, and the others froze, wide-eyed. The weight of Champa's words hit them like a punch to the gut. 10 gods of destruction? Was such a thing even possible? Kefla stood up abruptly, her eyes narrowing as she pointed an accusatory finger at Champa. "Bullshit!" she shouted. "You expect me to believe that? Sure, the Saiyans are strong, but killing 10 gods of destruction? That's impossible. The Goku and Vegeta I fought in the Tournament of Power were strong, but not that strong. No one can kill gods like that." Her words echoed through the room, but Champa just scowled, refusing to back down. Hit, as calm as always, stood silently, his arms crossed, but inside, he was stunned. If Champa was telling the truth, then the Saiyans had reached a level of power far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Light years beyond anything he could fathom. Still, something didn't sit right with him. There were too many gaps in Champa's story, too many things that didn't add up. Why would the gods allow this? Hit thought to himself. If the Saiyans were really this powerful, where were the angels? Where were Zeno and the Grand Priest? Surely they would have intervened by now. Hit's sharp instincts told him that Champa was hiding something, leaving out crucial details. But for now, he kept his thoughts to himself, silently watching as Champa continued his frantic rant. Champa's words were meant to instill fear, to justify his own panic, but instead, they left the room in a state of disbelief. None of them truly believed the Saiyans could have done something like this, not without help, not without some greater force pushing them to such extremes. And though Hit remained calm, his mind raced with possibilities. Could the Saiyans really have surpassed the gods? Or was there more at play here? Something bigger, something darker lurking behind the scenes. Hit stood silently, his sharp eyes narrowing as he processed Champa's wild claims. He had faced Goku and Vegeta before. He knew their personalities, their honor, and their limit. Neither of them was the type to just wake up one day and decide to attack a god of destruction. To Hit, that was nothing short of a death wish. Why would the Saiyans do something so reckless? He muttered to himself, deep in thought. Vegeta's too proud, and Goku, he's too forgiving, too childish. There's no way they'd launch an unprovoked assault on gods. It didn't add up. The pieces of the puzzle Champa was trying to force together didn't fit, and Hit's instincts told him something was missing. Champa isn't telling the full truth, he thought to himself, his suspicion growing with every word the god of destruction spat out in his panic. Whatever had really happened, Hit was certain there was more to the story than Champa was letting on. But before he could question it further, a dark and unsettling presence made itself known. The air around them seemed to thicken, the temperature dropping ever so slightly. Something was approaching, something dangerous. Hit's senses, always honed like a blade, picked up on it immediately. He straightened, his sharp eyes scanning the area as the atmosphere became tense. This was no ordinary energy. Whoever or whatever was out there had been hiding its presence for a long time. The figure finally revealed itself, stepping out from the shadows of the palace. It was a being of immense darkness, his aura crackling with a sinister, almost otherworldly energy. His presence was like a cold whisper, sending shivers down the spines of everyone in the room. He was tall, his skin a deep charcoal black, with glowing red eyes that pierced through the gloom. The being was none other than Mephistopheles, one of the last 3 primordial demon gods. Champa's usual bluster vanished in an instant. His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he stopped stuffing food into his mouth. "Whoa, what is this?" he stammered, his voice a mixture of confusion and fear. He had no idea who this being was, but one thing was far certain. He knew the being was powerful. Mephistopheles had been in Universe 6 for quite some time now, but he had expertly masked his energy, lurking in the shadows. He was the weakest of the primordial demon gods, a fact that had always weighed heavily on him. Long ago, before the great war between the demons and angels, he had only just risen to the level of a primordial demon god. Before that, he had been what was known as an archdemon, a powerful but still developing entity that was recently promoted to the ranks of the primordial demon god. He had barely begun to understand the full extent of his powers when the angels attacked. During that war, the angels had sealed him away, just like the other primordial demons. They had been at full strength for millennia, but Mephistopheles was different. He was still new to his power, still learning how to wield it. The attack had come too soon, and he had been locked away before he could truly master his abilities. Now that he was free, he was biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mephistopheles possessed the rare and dangerous Dark Siphon ability, which allowed him to absorb divine ki from any being possessing divine ki that wishes to harm him, making their energy his own. But the power came with limitations. He couldn't just absorb energy from someone far stronger than him and hope to survive a battle. The siphon only worked if his opponent's strength was somewhat close to his own. If he wasn't strong enough to endure their attacks, the Dark Siphon would be useless. That was the limitation of a new turn, primordial demon god. His level of master over the Dark Siphoning was not yet close to the level of the other demon gods. This was why Mephistopheles had kept his distance, hiding from the powerful angels that once roamed Universe 6. Margarita, Champa's angel, and her siblings had been too powerful for him to challenge directly. Mephistopheles knew better than to pick a fight he couldn't win. Even with his siphon ability, he would have been no match for 2 angels. So he had waited, lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting for the moment when the angels would disappear. Now, with Vados and the other angels gone, the time to make his move had finally arrived. And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.